Well, all right. Well, let's move on from from one Obama administration climate betrayal to another, shall we? So most people are aware of the whole thing. We covered it on the show a bunch. The Keystone XL pipeline, which is still currently the northern half of the pipeline, is still currently in limbo from the State Department. The southern half has been built and is actually moving oil. The southern part actually was fast-tracked by the Obama administration. While it is still up in the air whether or not the Obama administration is going to approve the northern part of it, quietly, the administration has actually pretty much allowed a workaround of KXL called the Alberta Clipper by this group called Enbridge. And recently there were some protesters at John Kerry's residence in Georgetown that you reported on. Tell us all about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting kind of sideline to Keystone, which is the pipeline that most people have heard of. You know, if you ask anyone about a tar sands pipeline out on the street, I think that they're going to tell you about Keystone, when in fact so the Keystone is TransCanada. There's a whole nother, there's many energy companies, but there's another big player in the Midwest pipeline game called Enbridge, and they have this pipeline called the Alberta Clipper, and it exists. It's been built. It was built years ago, and it runs north-south across borders, and it carries tar sands crude down, to refineries. And what they originally, Enbridge built it for, I think it was maybe 400,000 barrels a day. And in 2012, they were like, oh, we have more demand, we have more tar sands, let's expand this pipeline. And so they wanted to expand it to be over 800,000 barrels a day of tar sand crude flowing through this pipeline. But to do that, they need, much in the same way that Keystone is going through an environmental review, because they need a presidential permit as it crosses borders. The Alberta Clipper would need a similar permit and have to undergo a similar review. And so Enbridge applied for that permit in 2012 to expand this pipeline at the border. That process, as we've seen visibly from Keystone, is drawn out. It faces a lot of opposition, both on a national scale and really powerful local grassroots opposition to that. And so it got to the point where Enbridge was like, wow, this is taking a really long time. I wonder if there's something that we can do to make this better for ourselves. And so what they did is they built two connecting sort of offshoots off of this one pipeline that goes north-south across the border. They built one north of the border, and they built one south of the border. None of them intersect with the border, so they don't need any sort of presidential review or approval in that way. And they connected it to an older pipeline that they have that also runs north-south, sort of parallel to the Alberta Clipper. And so what they've been doing, or the plan, is to kind of funnel the tar sands through this workaround to allow them to pump more tar sands than they would have had with the permit for the initial Alberta Clipper, but that way they wouldn't have to undergo the environmental review. And so the protest that I reported on for ThinkProgress was held outside of Secretary John Kerry's house in Georgetown, and they were protesting. It was a group of, it was a youth coalition sort of from a bunch of Midwest schools, in the area where this Alberta Clipper expansion would be completed, and they're protesting. They claim, and a bunch of environmental groups also claim, and have filed a lawsuit that will be heard in federal court actually sometime this week. The judge is going to start hearing the case, that the State Department basically, through backdoor deals, allowed this expansion to go through without requiring an environmental permit, and that, basically violates kind of the role of the State Department in regulating these sorts of transnational pipelines.
Well, yeah, and not to mention that, one, I think it's pretty clear that it does, but also the fact that, if you looked at the mess that was the KXL process on how corrupt the actual environmental reviews were, which was where a lot of this scandal began with. Several years ago when the State Department, farmed out the environmental report to one of TransCanada's subsidiaries. The whole process itself up there of getting this oil out is really, really corrupt. And here they did they allowed this little workaround, so they could even avoid the fake oversight that they actually had. It's again another example of how much dirty energy really does have its sort of its claws. It appears in the State Department, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There are some interesting emails that actually were made public when this whole thing came out. When the court documents were filed, when the environmental groups first filed their lawsuit, they, as part of the documents filed to the court, submitted some emails from the State Department and it was the State Department and Enbridge officials talking about it, and they're basically, paraphrasing, the emails themselves are worth reading for anyone that's interested in the specifics, but, it was sort of like, oh, we have Enbridge over here, they're asking about when we're going to get this approved, like, can we just do it? Like, can we approve it for them? Like, let's approve it for them, basically. And sort of fast-tracked that, at the request of this energy company that has a fairly infamous reputation in this area because they are the energy company that was behind the Kalamazoo River oil spill, which was the largest inland oil spill in our nation's history. It happened 5 years ago. It spilled, I think, over 1 million gallons of tar sands crude into the Kalamazoo River. And, communities there, I've talked to some people both reporting on this protest specifically and reporting on the 5-year anniversary that happened in July of the oil spill. And communities there say that the river is there's still oil in the river. It's not clean. People are still suffering adverse health effects. And so to have Enbridge, who was responsible for this oil spill, come through and say, we're going to expand this pipeline and we're going to do it in a way that, may or may not be the proper, hoops to jump through and reviews that have been put in place, checks and balances, I think really to the people in the Midwest kind of reinforces this idea that Enbridge is sort of this untrustworthy company and that there's really no one holding them accountable. There's no one holding them responsible for actions of the past and potential irresponsible actions of the future. I think that's a real... that's a sentiment that's building some real strong grassroots opposition in the Midwest to a lot of the pipeline expansions that are happening there, Keystone and otherwise.